Welcome back, deep divers. Today we're diving into something that's really making waves down under, fossil fuel subsidies in Australia. And with climate change being, such a hot topic globally, well, it feels like the right time to take a closer look at this issue. Now, I'll be honest, it can get a bit complicated. So that's why we have our expert here to help us sort through all the information and find those nuggets of knowledge that really matter.
Absolutely. It's a pretty multifaceted issue with a lot of strong opinions on all sides. I think that's why this deep dive is so important. We're going beyond just the headlines to really try and understand what these subsidies mean for Australia's future. And especially for you, the Australian voter.
Okay, so let's unpack this. First of all, the amount of money involved here is just staggering. Our sources say that Australia spends a whopping 12 billion Australian dollars annually on fossil fuel subsidies. Just let that sink in for a second. That's like funding 140,000 teachers or building 23 brand new hospitals every year. And it kind of makes you wonder, is this really the most effective use of our resources, especially when the world is moving, quite rapidly towards cleaner energy?
Yeah, it's a figure that definitely raises eyebrows, especially when you consider that Australia has, committed to some pretty ambitious climate goals. It really begs the question, are we putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak?
Exactly. So before we dive into all the environmental and economic arguments, let's just break down what these subsidies actually are. What are we talking about here?
Well, it's not as simple as just handing over a giant check to the fossil fuel industry. It comes in a lot of different forms. There's direct funding for exploration and extraction of new fossil fuel reserves, tax breaks that benefit these companies, and even incentives for building infrastructure like pipelines and refineries.
Pipelines, refineries, those sound pretty expensive. So who exactly benefits from these subsidies? Is it everyday Australians, through lower energy prices, or is it something else entirely?
That's a really key point of contention. While some argue that subsidies help keep energy prices low for consumers, a lot of it actually flows directly to big mining companies, particularly through something called the Fuel Tax Credit Scheme.
Oh, the fuel tax credit scheme. Our sources say that alone accounts for about $8 billion annually. And get this, mining companies receive roughly half of that benefit. So it seems a bit counterintuitive, right? On the one hand, Australia is pushing for climate action, but on the other hand, it's heavily subsidizing the very industry that's contributing to the problem.
Exactly, and this inconsistency in policy, it sends mixed signals both domestically and internationally. And it raises questions about Australia's commitment to a sustainable future.
It really surprised me to learn just how much Australia is spending on these subsidies. It makes you think, couldn't this money be used in a better way? Especially when it comes to tackling climate change, which is an issue that's already impacting Australians.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the environmental consequences of these subsidies. Australia, despite its relatively small population, has a surprisingly large environmental footprint.
Yeah, our sources say that Australia ranks 15th globally
Hmm.
in total greenhouse gas emissions and 8th in per capita emissions. And it's the third largest exporter of fossil fuels. That's a lot of responsibility on our shoulders.
It really is. And continuing to subsidize fossil fuels while at the same time trying to reduce emissions, well, it just seems contradictory. It's like trying to put out a fire while pouring gasoline on it.
Wow, that's a powerful image, and one that I think really highlights the urgency of the situation. But what about the economic arguments? Are these subsidies actually good for Australia's economy in the long run? Or are they actually holding us back?
That's where things get really interesting. You'd think subsidizing an industry would help boost the economy, right? But even economists are now raising concerns, saying that these subsidies are counterproductive, that they're actually distorting the market and hindering the transition to cleaner, more sustainable energy sources.
Wait, counterproductive? How so?
Well, think of it this way. Imagine the government subsidizing cigarettes while simultaneously running campaigns to encourage people to quit smoking. Those mixed messages just create confusion and undermine the overall goal.
That's a fantastic analogy. It really illustrates that contradiction at the heart of Australia's policies.
Exactly, and it's not just about the money. It's about the long-term consequences for Australia's environment, its economy, and its international reputation.
And speaking of consequences, our sources point out that Australians are already feeling the very real effects of climate change. We're talking about droughts, devastating bushfires, damage to iconic ecosystems like the Great Barrier Reef. These aren't just abstract threats, they're happening right now.
Absolutely, and these impacts are only going to get worse in the coming years, affecting everything from agriculture to tourism to public health. This isn't a distant future problem. This is happening here and now.
Yeah, it really makes you think, like, what can we as voters actually do about it? Sometimes these big issues feel so overwhelming, like, one voice can't possibly make a difference.
I get that. I totally understand that feeling. But collective action always starts with individual awareness and engagement. And the good news is Australian voters have more power than they might realize.
Okay, I'm listening.
Yeah.
What can we do to actually make a difference on this issue?
Well, first and foremost, stay informed. I know it sounds obvious, but knowledge is power. Resources like the one you've provided for this deep dive are so valuable. They cut through all the noise and present this complex information in a clear and digestible way so that you can really understand the core issues.
Exactly. We've done the heavy lifting for you, dear listener, so you can get up to speed and start making informed decisions. But what comes next? How do we actually translate that knowledge into action?
Once you're armed with the facts, use your voice. Don't underestimate the power of contacting your elected representatives. Let them know that you're concerned about fossil fuel subsidies and the impact they're having on Australia's future.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people don't realize that. Just sending a well-crafted email or making a phone call to their local MP can actually make a difference.
It's true. Politicians are accountable to their constituents, and the more they hear from voters who are passionate about this issue, the more likely they are to take it seriously.
So step one, get informed. Step two, make your voice heard. What else?
Supporting organizations that are working towards a transition to renewable energy, that's crucial. There are so many groups out there doing incredible work, advocating for a more sustainable future for Australia, but they need our support to make a real impact.
Oh, and don't forget the power of the purse. We as consumers have choices. We can choose renewable energy providers. We can invest in energy-efficient appliances and support businesses that are committed to sustainability.
Absolutely. Every decision we make as individuals and as a society sends a signal about the kind of future we want. It's about aligning our actions with our values.
And speaking of sending signals, perhaps the most impactful action we can take is voting, and voting informed. That means researching the candidates' positions on climate change and energy policy, and choosing representatives who will champion a sustainable future for Australia.
Exactly. Policy changes like phasing out fossil fuel subsidies and investing in renewable energy, they require strong political will, and that's where informed voters come in. By making climate action a priority at the ballot box, Australians can drive real lasting change.
Okay, so to recap, stay informed, use your voice, support organizations that are working towards a sustainable future, make conscious consumer choices, and vote for representatives who share your vision for a cleaner, greener Australia. It might seem like it a lot, but each step builds momentum towards a brighter future.
That's a great summary. And remember, change doesn't happen overnight, but it does start with each one of us taking action.
And let's be clear, this isn't just about saving the planet. It's about securing a healthier, more prosperous, and more sustainable future. For all Australians, it's about ensuring a thriving economy, protecting our unique environment,
Right.
and building a legacy that we can all be proud of.
Well said. By choosing to confront this challenge head-on, Australia has the opportunity not just to adapt to a changing world, but to actually lead the way towards a brighter, more sustainable future.
Okay, so we've explored the what, the why, and the how. But I always like to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question to ponder. Something to spark further reflection and maybe even inspire action.
I like where this is going to hit me.
So given everything we've talked about, the scale of these subsidies, the impacts on the environment, the economy, and, the potential for Australia to take a different path, it really begs the question, how should Australia balance its economic interest with its environmental responsibilities? It's a question every Australian voter needs to think about.
It is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's
Well,
definitely a balancing act. Australia has a strong economy that's built on its resources, but it also has this responsibility
yeah.
to protect its environment and, tackle this challenge of climate change. There's no easy answer. But I think this deep dive has given us the tools we need to start asking the right questions and, have those important conversations.
Yeah, for sure. It's a complex issue, but it's one that Australians can't ignore. The decisions we make today are going to shape the future of this country for generations to come. So, dear listener, don't let this deep dive be just, a passive thing. Let it be a springboard for action.
Absolutely. Keep exploring this issue. Look into the resources we've talked about. Educate yourself. And most importantly, engage with others. Talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues. Share what you've learned. Encourage them to join the conversation.
Because at the end of the day, the future of Australia isn't set in stone. It's shaped by the choices that we make today. And by, engaging in informed civic action, each and every one of us can contribute to a more sustainable,
Yeah. Okay.
prosperous, and, equitable future.
For all Australians. That's what makes democracy so powerful. Every Australian has a voice, and every vote counts. So get informed, make your voice heard, and cast your vote for the future you want to see.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into fossil fuel subsidies in Australia. We hope it's given you some food for thought and, inspired you to take action. Remember, the power to shape a brighter future for Australia lies within each one of us.
Until next time, keep diving deep.